All right. Hello, everyone, and good morning, and welcome to New America. My name is Mary Alice McCarthy. I lead the Center on Education and Labor here at New America, and it's just such a great pleasure to welcome everyone here today. We have an incredible, packed lineup for you today. We are going to have some really fantastic conversations around the first 100 days of the Trump-Vance administration. I do want to just say, before I get into just a few opening remarks, we are starting at 11:30 and we're going to end at 1:30. There are going to be sandwiches right outside. I know we're going right over the lunch hour, so stick with us. We've even got some snacks in the back to help you get through that lunch hour, and some drinks and water in the back. So stick with us. I think we're in for a really great conversation, and thank you so much for coming out today. So today's event is brought to you by the Good Jobs Collaborative. We're a coalition of policy researchers, worker advocates, and labor leaders committed to building a good jobs economy, an economy that puts the needs of working people at the center of our public policies. That is the need for economic security, for respect and dignity on the job, for a voice in the workplace. We are a group, as I said, of about 14 oh, wait a minute, the slide was not there. Okay, we are going to go backwards. And we're going to stick with the slide. So we're a group of about 14 organizations, and I was going to have a slide with them all lifted up there. We didn't quite get to that, so bear with us. But rather than list off all of our names, just know that we're some of the largest labor organizations in the country, some of the biggest think tanks, and some of the biggest worker advocate organizations. And again, we're just really thrilled to be here with you today. So we're here today to talk about those first 100 days. Out on the campaign trail, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance promised to fight for workers and to deliver tangible benefits, more jobs, higher wages, lower costs. Since taking office, however, the administration has essentially declared a war on workers, right? Attacking our jobs, our organizations, right? Our rights and our legal protections. Two groups of workers in particular have been in the crosshairs of the Trump-Vance administration: federal workers and immigrant workers, and both have been subject to harassment and flagrant violations of their rights, from the illegal mass firings of probationary federal workers to the illegal deportation and even imprisonment of immigrant workers. In March alone, the Trump administration laid off 275,000 federal workers. That's not even counting the many thousands of private sector workers who have lost their jobs as a result of canceled federal grants and contracts. The administration has also taken a chainsaw to the independent agencies that enforce our country's labor and employment laws. It has hobbled the National Labor Relations Board, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the Merit Systems Protection Board, each vital institutions for ensuring that worker rights are actually enforced. And it has attacked long-standing labor laws and protections directly, from the collective bargaining rights of federal workers to civil rights protections that date back more than 50 years. And they've done all this while taking an economy that, while it still wasn't delivering enough for working people, was at least healthy and stable in macroeconomic terms, and subjected it to a series of erratic policies that have undermined consumer and business confidence, weakened our role in the global economy, while delivering no tangible benefits for working people, just higher prices. So we're going to talk about what happened in these first 100 days. How is this a way of fighting for workers? It sure doesn't look like that. And our speakers will have a lot more to say about what these first 100 days have meant for their members and for the workers that they represent. But, you know, that's not all we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the future as well, about how we fight back, about how we build a better democracy and a better economy for working families. Because as bad as things are right now, it's important to keep at the center of our thoughts and of our conversations the fact that a majority of working class voters sent a very clear message in the last election. And it was a message of dissatisfaction with the status quo, with the economy, and even more broadly, with our political system and democracy. And as our constitutional and democratic crises deepen, I think it's urgent that we recognize that our democracy in its current form has not been delivering for millions of working people in America. It has not been delivering economic security, opportunity, respect and dignity at work, a sense of being heard and valued as a worker. And that failure which has been going on for decades, is at the root of so much that is wrong with our politics today. So as we examine the present today in these first 100 days, we also need to challenge ourselves to imagine a future that is different and a future that working people can believe in. And we're going to hear from an incredible group of leaders today on just those questions, on where we are, how workers can fight back, and what exactly it is we're all fighting for. Now, the plan originally was for us to kick off with some remarks by Senator Christopher Murphy of Connecticut, and we're very excited that Senator Murphy is still going to be able to join us, but unfortunately, there was a Senate floor vote at exactly 11:30 when we were kicking off. So he is still going to join us. But we're going to go ahead and get started with our two other excellent conversation partners who are going to join in conversation with the senator. Two people who have been thinking and writing about workers and organizing workers for some time. We're going to listen in as Jamelle Bouie, journalist and regular New York Times columnist who has written extensively about American democracy, about American politics and the labor movement, talks with writer and labor organizer Erica Smiley, who is also the leader of Jobs with Justice and the co-author of the book, The Future We Need, Organizing for a Better Democracy in the 21st Century. We will welcome Senator Murphy into that conversation when he arrives, and thanks to everyone for your flexibility. Once we're done, I'm going to go ahead and just quickly give you a little preview to where we're going. We're then going to transition to a hearing from a group of fantastic union leaders and worker advocates, folks who are on the front lines defending workers today. And they're going to share with you how they're fighting back, but also what it is, what the future is that they're fighting for. And then we're going to wrap up our discussion and really address that question of where do we go from here and how do we build a pro-worker, good jobs economy. And we're going to introduce a tool that our Good Jobs Collaborative has developed to help guide us in that, and it's called the Good Jobs Compass. And it will point us in the direction of a good jobs economy. So with that, it's just a special honor and privilege to welcome Jamelle Bouie and Erica Smiley into conversation, and I will hand it over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for everyone for coming out this morning still to join us in this discussion. Erica, I want to ask you first two things. First, could you actually describe what your work with Job for Justice is like? And then could you just, I feel like we've already gotten a sense of this answer, but like, what has the first 100 days for workers look like under Trump from your perspective?
It's been great for our skin, you know, trying to smile. You know what I mean? It's like keeps the cheekbones high. I'm Erica Smiley. My friends call me Smiley. And I'm the executive director of Jobs with Justice. It's a national network of community labor coalitions that seek to expand the ways in which and the number of people who can organize and collectively bargain. And the so what of that is that we don't necessarily see ourselves as just a workers' rights organization. We see ourselves as a democracy organization. And we say that because when you think about the constitutional amendments that happened after the Civil War that were designed to integrate a formerly enslaved population into what was supposed to be a multiracial democracy, these were the terms they used. The first constitutional amendment was a labor amendment. And we believe that you can actually have a democracy just in the civil society and political framework unless you also have a majority of people participating in decision-making in their economic and employment lives. And so that's why we really drive organizing collective bargaining power. In the first 100 days.
First 100 days.
I mean, I did say the thing about the cheekbone, so I hold true to that. It has been, let me just say this, as shocking as it has been, and I don't want to undermine it or deflate the feeling of it, it has also been as expected, as articulated. They've told us who they were, and we should believe them. They told us what they were going to do to some degree, and we needed to believe them. They said they were going to dismantle the so-called administrative state. That's exactly what they're doing. If we think of the people who are in power right now as running, they want to run the country like it's their own company. You know, like, well, we'll stop the war in Gaza if you sell it to us. You know, we'll stop the war in Ukraine if you sell us the minerals. You know, and so we'll sell the buildings even. One thing I want to take in terms of the opening remarks, right? But this will, I want to say this because I really want to spend most of our time talking about the future and what's in front of us, because the fact that it is laid so plain tells us, right? Like we know, a lot of us have known, we've been in a Cold War for a minute. Now it's very plain what our opposition wants to do, what they're trying to do, and that democracy is no longer even a facade that they're trying to say that their work is behind. But the thing that I want to know, Marielle said that an overwhelming number of voters, majority of voters, gave us a message in voting for Trump. But actually, the majority of voters voted by not voting. And so it was like an abstention vote. So certainly Trump had more votes than Kamala Harris, but the majority of voters don't actually. I have a mentor who once told me, like, if people don't believe that the democracy is working, then they won't participate. They'll bow out. This isn't the thing. So democracy has been losing. It's been losing for a minute. And in fact, if we think of ourselves, I just came from a policy link community, think of ourselves as the new founders of a new nation that's not yet here yet, then I think that we actually will have an opportunity to really build a democracy worth fighting for.
So why do you think, I mean, you spend a lot of time talking with workers, being with, ordinary people doing their jobs. Like, what do you think is the frustration, the disillusionment with democracy, such that people are just no longer participating at all?
Yeah. So in this relationship, this very symbiotic relationship between majority, just to define it, majority decision making, the majority of people have some platform to engage in decision making about their lives, right? If we think of a collective bargaining agreement, it's just a policy for a workplace that everyone gets to set and then everyone gets to enforce and grieve. That's democracy. So while the same people who have been fighting for democracy in the public sphere, our friends in Congress and whatever, have not necessarily been fighting as hard for democracy where people feel it, which is in the workplace. And the irony is, while 80 million people perhaps took a step back from democracy in this last election, hundreds of millions of workers have been trying to take a step into it for the last few years. When you think about the fight for democracy, it happens on the shop floor. I was talking to Renee Berry, who's one of the leaders who, and I think is the president of the local now, of the new Volkswagen union in Chattanooga. And we were in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and she said, they still need us to make the cars regardless of who's in the White House. So if we're really trying to fight for democracy, why aren't they, we have leverage, let's fight here, right? I talked to Sanchione Butler, who some of you know, who is an auto worker in Dallas, Texas, who was talking about like democracy and the women's liberation movement. She said, well, our women's liberation fight was when we got a women's bathroom on the shop floor. That's where we were fighting for reproductive justice and equality. That so many regular, everyday people may not come out to the rallies, may not have time necessarily between work and feeding their children to be at every demonstration and protest. Are actually fighting to step into and build a real democracy of our ancestors' dreams right where most of us spend the bulk of their time, which is at work.
Do you think, so I 100% agree with this assessment, right? That, if you think of...
You don't have to, Jamil.
No, but I do. I was saying earlier, she was like, she was asking me about my TikToks and was like, are you joking?
I was not asking you about TikTok.
Are you being serious? And I was like, I just have a single affect all the time. So it's hard to tell what my tone is a lot of the times.
Which is really hard for someone like me who doesn't pick up on social cues at all. So I'm just very trying to read in between the lines.
So no, I do agree with you. That, if you think of democracy as sort of like really a set of habits, and like all habits, you have to do them in order for them to kind of become a natural part of how you operate. It's really meaningful that for most Americans, the place they are most of the time, they're not really engaged in any kind of democratic practice or democratic habit. And I guess my question then is, do people perceive it that way, right? Like, is there a sense that, I want more participation where I work? And I think about this not in terms of, can I get a better hourly wage or more benefits or more privileges on the job, but I think about it in terms almost like of self-determination. Like, is that a thing that people think, or is that like basically political education that has to be done in order to make that connection?
Well, I'll put it like this. I think very few people, if you ask them, will say, yes, I fight for democracy every day at work, and I really believe in self-determination for the people. What they will say, or what they will show you, is that in work sites where people have value, where they feel that they have some say over the conditions of that place, the metrics, which aren't always the same metrics that an Elon Musk might look like or look at, but the metrics of that can be very telling about what people desire. So let's just look at one example. During the pandemic, there was Adam Dean did a study of nursing homes, first in Connecticut, then around the country. In Connecticut, the nursing homes and assisted living facilities where the staff had a voice in what to do in response to the pandemic, that had some democratic ability to weigh in, there were 30% less deaths due to COVID. Okay, is that like the workers' rights statistic? It should be, right? There was a separate study years ago of corrections officers, where the corrections officers that had union representation and had a democratic say in how the work site was run, how safety was developed, had a less percentage of domestic violence at home. So the power and respect that they got on their work site, they didn't try to have to make up for it by beating up their families. Now, that's not a metric necessarily that you see when people are talking about prisons or work, but it is a metric that shows you that when people want the ability to be valued, there's a dignity in work. And my co-author and successor and really good friend, Sarita Gupta, always reminds me the so what is actually joy. People like working. Despite our opposition talking about lazy workers and this, that, and the third, and people just want more money to do less, that's not actually true. People want to be valued and respected, and people want to make a contribution. Very few people, I was joking with Rebecca back in the green room, I was in Brookhaven talking to Betty Jones, Nissan, and very few people will tell you I'm a worker. And not even specific, like I'm an auto worker. What they'll say is, oh, I'm a checker. I'm an assembler. I paint. I'm in the paint department. And they're proud of that. They're proud of their contribution of what they do. They're proud that they take care of elderly people. They're proud to work in the public school system. They don't necessarily do it just for the money. They want to be sustained at doing something that they're proud of, and they want to be valued. And so would they say, I want to fight for self-determination, I want democracy at the job? Maybe some, maybe not, right? But I don't actually care so much about what they would say and more about what they want to do. And this is why I keep saying so many working people are fighting to actually build democracy, whereas many people have checked out politically, or actually so many working people are fighting to build democracy in their workplaces, in their economic lives. And it's actually a big part of rebuilding a faith in democratic institutions that work to actually support them in doing that.
So let's think about sort of the state of political democracy right now, and sort of how workers...
The political what?
Political democracy.
Is that...
Democracy.
Are we're still talking about the United States?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Maybe in training. Democracy.
Right.
In training.
Democracy
Okay.
with one training wheel on right now.
Okay. It's on life support.
Yeah. What, in your view, how should, not workers, but sort of organized labor, how should unions be responding to the administration right now? The administration, which is taking an axe to labor law, a Supreme Court that seems to be itching to want to render the National Labor Relations Act basically unconstitutional. What is the approach in this moment? In a moment where the political world, at the very least, or at least the people in power, are extraordinarily hostile to organized labor, even as they pay lip service to workers.
Yeah. So I'm just going to expose you a little bit, right? I did discover that we're both Civil War nerds, even though, whatever. So reason I start with that is because if we think about this in the context of a war, albeit a Cold War, right? It's not necessarily open battle, but if we've been in a Cold War over this question of building a multiracial democracy versus, liberty for the few to exploit the many, then I think that we have to know that workers and their unions or organizations have been on the front line in that fight for a long time. the bloodiest battles are happening on the shop floor. However, in this context, if we think about our enemy has taken the Citadel, right? So they're in the White House. That doesn't necessarily mean that we've lost the war. Right? So part of what I think in a war, you have lots of different strategy and tactics. Just in a campaign, we might think of where do we advance, where do we defend, in a war, you also add things like where do we, yield because we have to focus our energy over here. Where do we disorganize and disrupt and maybe go kamikaze to kind of keep them busy on other things so they do less bad things. And I think that's actually how we as a movement, as a labor movement and as a democracy movement have to think about our work. There are things where we could actually win and gain, where there might be an overreach that we could use not only to keep them from doing something bad, but to push something good. And I know we're going to hear from SEIU and others later today on Medicaid and Medicare. There are places where we could actually be framing our actual vision for democracy of governance in state, local legislation that may or may not win, but that will busy them up. So the same stuff that they've been doing to us for years will busy them up on things that would make it difficult to move other items. For example, we talk about reproductive justice. They are, obviously opposed. And but one key element of reproductive justice is the ability to actually carry a pregnancy through. And a lot of workplaces are making that very difficult. Like if you want to go and work in the auto industry in the new EV and you want to, build semiconductors and chips, if you don't actually have the ability to negotiate with a union for better standards to have like democratic decision making, then what you're saying is I'll get paid a little more, but also have a 40% increase in miscarriage. So what would it look like to just run pregnancy accommodation bills throughout the, divide their base in the states? I was telling you, we got to go kamikaze on them in the states, busy them up, confuse them a little bit, have some fun. Don't tease me with a good time, I like a good fight. But I think that it's less about simply just being, no offense, Jamil, like the media and responding to every little thing. And it's more about keeping our eyes on the prize of democracy and, fighting where we need to defend where we need to and trying to create as little harm as possible, but also trying to build democracy. And on this last point, I'll just say that a lot of these companies, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, so Amazon, Walmart, whatever, Tesla, Starlink, whatever they're all called, the dark LLC, they have long been governing or ruling, I guess to use your word, right? Like single-handedly ruling in these containers where we don't actually have governing institutions. And I'll give two examples. The first one is they've long been ruling in industry. They set industry standards. Sometimes they're more formal than others. But if you look at, say, manufacturing and specifically, say, the auto industry or textiles, they've got a set of rules that they've been running, and a lot of companies will then play into those rules or buy into those rules, and they get to set the rules. But why aren't we actually contesting for democratic decision-making power in that industry? I mean, this is the brilliance of, say, the Justice for Janitors campaign of SEIU, or even just to get outside the box, because they have unions too, right, with our athletic associations. We hear about sectoral bargaining when we hear people talking about fast food campaigns and negotiation, but the NFLPA has long been a sectoral bargaining strategy. They negotiate with the league, right? Because each of the individual franchises, well, some of them are batshit crazy, and some of them are business mongers, right? Like it's better to actually have an industry standard for that sport. Well, why not in manufacturing or in other sectors? And the other container is in a lot of these labor and consumer markets. So you look at a company like Amazon, like Walmart, they've long been governing in these specific markets. But, for us, we're like, oh, well, let's go pass something. We passed the Warehouse Worker Protection Act in New York State. But that doesn't necessarily cross New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut where they're governing. Welcome, Senator. We've just been saying a lot about you. We've got a lot of things for you to do.
The entire conversation is...
Everything has just been waiting for you to come so that we could, put some things on your list.
I'll tell you.
And so, with that said, I'm going to stop and pass it back to you, Jamil.
All right. Welcome, Senator Murphy.
How are you?
Good. I guess I'll just jump in. What are you thinking about these days?
Well, I'm thinking that I would have rather been on time with all of you. But listen, great to see you both. Thanks for having me today. Well, tell me what you've been talking about, and I'll be happy to riff off of it, because I'm thinking about a lot of things, including whether my 13-year-old son is going to make a travel hockey team when the tryouts list comes out tonight. So you don't want to hear about that.
Well,
Democracy and stuff, No, we were just talking a little bit about the containers for democracy. So as you were walking in, I was saying that a lot of companies have been ruling or kind of governing undemocratically in containers where we don't necessarily have democratic institutions. And working people have been vying for democratic decision-making in those containers. And part of, if we aren't going to support them, if we haven't built enough of a framework to say these are democratic struggles, it's not just a workers' rights fight, but that the workers at Volkswagen are fighting for democracy at work. The workers at McDonald's are fighting for democracy at work. The workers at Amazon are fighting for democracy at work. Then when they don't see support in those fights, then they don't actually think democracy actually works. Yeah. And so that's where we're at, I think.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm obviously interested to go wherever you all want to go. I've been making the argument for a couple of years now that this country is in deep spiritual crisis, and that explains a lot of what we're going through today, and explains a lot of Trump's rise. And I think there are a lot of different elements to that spiritual crisis, but part of it is this massive hollowing out of control and agency that workers and families have in their lives. They just, don't believe that the inputs match the outputs any longer. The centers of economic and cultural and political power are further away from human beings than ever before. Even if you just want to talk about your workspace, your company is now much more likely to be owned by an entity that is several levels removed from you, a parent company owned by a private equity firm. Right. And so you can't even kind of see the people who are making the decisions about your life any longer. We're so far removed from an economy where local chambers of commerce or Rotary clubs had real power, because sitting around that table were the owners of the companies, the decision makers of the companies that mattered in your community. You can't even find the decision makers any longer. And that dovetails with the ways that families are feeling about the role that technology plays in their life. The decisions that matter most right now to a lot of families are the decisions that some technicians at Facebook, Instagram, Apple, YouTube are making about the algorithm. Like, that's literally the most important thing to their kids' lives, is which direction the algorithm takes them. And so you just have this world in which workers and families feel like control is so far away from them. And so as Democrats, you have to understand that that's like not just an economic question, that's a spiritual question, because you can't find purpose and meaning in the morning when you get up if you don't feel like the things that you do that day are going to actually impact the quality of your life and the quality of your kids' lives. So restructuring an economy in which the people who have control over your economic lives are closer to you is really, really important. That's why the conversation about unions is so critical, because then at least, right, your union has power, not all the power, but it's got a little bit of power. It's got enough power for it to feel meaningful every day, and just your interaction in that collective bargaining space can give you a sense of agency, even if it doesn't solve all of your problems. And it's also why the antitrust agenda is so important, not just to competitive markets, but to the spiritual health of the country, because as you are pushing the centers of economic control back closer to local communities, you are just making people feel like they have somebody that they can call up, maybe not call up, but at least somebody they can see that has power in their local economic community.
Do you think there might be a little bit of tension between those two things, though? Since antitrust pushing economic power back down to maybe smaller firms, but smaller firms are notoriously more difficult to unionize, right? That one of the advantage unions can produce is just scale, and that scale provides countervailing power to the corporate world. And so, do you think that there is quite possibly, there's maybe you can do one or the other, but not necessarily both?
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, I think it is harder to organize everywhere today.
Is that true? I don't know.
Right, and so I think you have to endeavor to solve for both problems. I mean, maybe you can just admit that there's only a certain amount of oxygen, and so you got to pick one problem or the other. But from a vision standpoint, we should say that we are both going to solve for the problem of concentrated power, and we are going to make it a whole lot easier to organize. My argument is that we should be really unapologetically pro-union, and this sort of framing that we have had as a party for decades, in which we are looking to create an even playing field, a level playing field, is actually antiquated and outdated and doesn't actually match where people are. We actually should create an uneven playing field in which you tilt the balance towards collective bargaining, towards membership in labor unions, and not be afraid to talk about it as a net good to workers, to owners, and to the economy writ large. So yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I think you just have to say we're going to do both. Our mission is to devolve power back down to local communities, to break up the monopolies and quasi-monopolies, and also to make it a whole hell of a lot easier for workers to join together and collectively bargain.
I mean, like, even the National Labor Relations Act, just to give this point about it's not just a level playing field, when it was originally written, like Wagner it overly protected the rights of workers because of this reason, and then it was kind of pushed back by the courts and then slowly eroded. But that equity is very different than just like a starting equality, and that requires us to actually expand democracy, period, right, regardless of where people are starting at, and to be unapologetic about it. I couldn't agree more. I also think, though, and just to also kind of second the senator's point about the both and, is that if we're actually trying to democratize the containers, which are already being governed badly or undemocratically, that sometimes means going beyond our traditional county, district, state, whatever framework for political governance. We have to look at where they're governing themselves in these labor markets, in these industries, in these sectors. Workers are probably the best equipped, to get back to your original question, Jamel, at fighting autocracy, because workplaces have been autocracies for centuries. If we want to look, oftentimes if you want to figure out how to win, you got to look to the people who've been losing a lot, because you can actually see what's coming. And as a Southerner, and I think you were actually in my home state recently. Weren't you in like the Hall River Ballroom?
I was.
Bless it. Yeah. Bless it. Yeah, I'm from North Carolina. I'm a native,
That's like North Carolina. That's like,
yeah,
that's
it's the real, that's a real place right there.
I've not been to before.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll have to talk about that, but good. You did well. You did well. But my point is that it's not always, especially as Southerners, right? Like we have been kind of chasing the promise of democracy for a long time. And part of that is a civil society fight and a political fight. But a big chunk of that is an economic fight. The first Reconstruction Amendment after the Civil War, again, was a labor amendment to abolish slavery and forced labor, which means that a big part of moving democracy is about building an equitable democratic decision-making in our economic lives. And I appreciate you bringing in this, essentially the notion of a fissured workplace by David Weil, right? Like this idea that we can't even see our boss. And the same is true in other economic relationships, whether we're looking at a tenant signing their rent check over to LLC 145, or, who actually owns your mortgage. Like it's very unclear. And so whether it's organizing to make that more local, more, community banks and whatever, credit unions and things like that, or also at the same time trying to organize people who have similar, even if it's LL 145, checks that they write their rent to or getting paid from, to organize around that ultimate benefactor and to actually democratize that space, not just in the framework of your direct employer, which is outdated, but in the framework of who actually is making the decisions about your work lives or your economic lives, and expanding democracy there as well.
On this, since we've kind of been talking about it a little bit, on this question of just tilting the playing field in favor of workers, I mean, have you been doing any thinking about what happens if the NLRB goes away, right? If the court really decides against it and kind of brings us back to almost the status quo before the National Labor Relations Act? Like, what does that look like to you for this notion of tilting the playing field in favor of unionization and labor?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a very hard world to imagine. It's dystopian for workers, and the question is whether that provides some very strange, weird silver lining, which is the ability to do a real, true crossover into Trump's base to operationalize this realignment that we know has been there for a long time, right? We understand that he's been picking up a lot of support from lower income voters, working class voters. There's a lot of complicated reasons for that, and we know that Democrats have taken for granted that vote for a long time. But the question is there a galvanizing issue that allows us, to essentially bring together a big chunk of the Democratic base and vote and a sizable piece of the MAGA coalition to say enough is enough. And if the NLRB were to disappear, if essentially the floor fell out of collective bargaining in this country, that would, for a lot of Trump's voters, be definitive proof that it was a total 100% fraud. You're already seeing that start to happen, frankly, much more quickly than a lot of us thought. That's why his approval ratings go in like literally 2 weeks from 47 to 39, because a lot of lower income voters in his coalition are starting to wonder whether he gives a damn at all about the prices that they're paying. But that would be a potentially definitive moment that would allow an opening for us to create a brand new, potentially really powerful coalition. Now, that's not a short-term solution, but that might have some real long-term positive consequences for working families and for lower income voters.
I want to agree with you, but up to a point.
Sure.
Right? If the NLRB was gone, and again, I'm going to harken you back to your Hall River Ballroom experience, where workers have long lost, if they ever had, many of the protections of the National Labor Relations Act. And something that Sarita and I found when we were doing the research and frankly organizing around our book was that in many of those places, not only were they not trying to just get back to, say, the National Labor Relations Act or any other 20th century kind of protections for democracy, they actually had an imagination for something better that actually would impact them even far beyond. And so if the NLRB were to go away, it would be tragic for many folks. Right? It would be tragic for many folks. People would lose a direct protection. And without federal labor law protection, part of what we would need to think about, again, as an army for democracy, is, so then what could we do in the state of California that's better to model what the next NLRA looks like? What can we do in the state of Massachusetts that's better, that models what the next NLRA looks like? Why couldn't we even bring back the 1915 Walsh Report and look at the National Industrial Relations Act that preceded the National Labor Relations Act, that arguably had more teeth and was more about democracy than just kind of making commerce run smoothly? And so I do think, while it would be a blow, I think that there's also opportunity in the crisis. And that's something that I want to keep hold of because, again, in the spirit of working people constantly fighting for democracy in their daily lives, when they are contesting for decision-making power at work, whether that's directly through a union or just trying to win a basic fan over the gutting floor at Smithfield, like, that is actually people who are trying to insert themselves into democratic practice. How could we actually reimagine democratic protections around that and build a new 21st century democracy that's more to our ancestors' dreams perhaps than what we've been building so far? It wasn't like workers first started organizing after the Wagner Act. I mean, we were organizing to build the Wagner Act, to build it in our image. So what law needs to exist 30 years from now that's in the image of workers today is actually more my question, regardless of whether or not we lose the NLRA.
We haven't spoken too much about the first 100 days. We kind of left that aside. It's been a very interesting conversation, but we kind of were like, we'll look to the future. And one thing one thing that's been striking to me about these first 100 days is how I think the administration's actions have not revealed, but made clear how the separation that we often see in discourse between issues for workers and then like so-called identity politics isn't isn't really tenable, right? So, Kilmar Abrego Garcia is a sheet metal worker, an apprentice, right? The immigration crackdowns are devastating. Agricultural labor, building trades. The attack on DEI in a lot of ways is like a labor disciplining device, sort of like dictating to federal agencies and to private businesses how they can hire and who they're supposed to hire. That's right. This is a question for you, Senator Murphy. Is this kind of observation part of how Democrats are thinking of messaging, right? Sort of not trying to connect for the public the connection between these two things. Because in polls, right, you see that voters say, well, we're really unhappy with how Trump is handling the economy, but we're actually a little happier about how he's handling immigration. And for voters, there's this sort of this conceptual separation between these things. And I don't really sense anyone trying to, outside of like nerds like me, trying to erase that conceptual separation, because in practice, it doesn't really exist.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think you can extend that that frame to what's happening in the federal workforce as well, right? I mean, there was this idea that it was always going to be a net winner for Republicans to be attacking the federal government. It turns out that there are all sorts of people that work for the federal government: conservatives, progressives, veterans, right? And when you see the full scope of the damage that gets done, folks aren't as excited about the project. And the argument about why we should prioritize immigration was a cultural argument. It was an argument about trying to make people scared of their neighbors so as to distract from the thievery and the corruption. But it was also, to many people, an economic message. It was, these people are taking our jobs, and if we do something about immigration, that will improve the economy. Then in the end, this is a pathway to prosperity. And when people are looking down the barrel of a recession, when people are looking at a car costing $3,000, $4,000 more, it makes them a little bit less interested in the immigration message, because it exposes the immigration message for Republicans as a sort of pure race play, as a pure scare tactic, because it actually doesn't look like these guys care about the economy at all. In fact, it looks like they're actually intentionally sending us into a recession. So maybe immigration wasn't about my job and wasn't about my wages. Maybe it was really just about them making me try to be scared of people who look different from me, and that. Listen, there are a lot of people who that message still may play with, but when it gets exposed in that way, it makes it a little bit hard to have broader penetration. When it loses that connective tissue to the economic fight, it's a little bit more unsavory. And I think that's in part why you're seeing, these I would say surprising numbers supporting or opposing the deportation of Abrego Garcia, because folks are sort of recognizing that, wait, that now looks to be more about a democracy, rule of law agenda, not as much about an economic agenda, what he's doing on immigration.
He's also one of our guys. I mean, just to be frank, I mean, especially if you think of the building trades, construction workers as kind of the stereotypical, white guy with a hammer or whatever. I mean, Kilmar is a member of Sheet Metal Workers Local 100, Smart Local 100, and was deported. And so there is something to say about whether or not we, in our national messaging, recognize the attacks on DEI, on immigration, as attacks on workers and democracy. It certainly felt that way and experienced that way when this happens. You've got Jeanette from the National Domestic Workers. You've got working people. These are people's coworkers that are being disappeared. And when that happens, that actually does create a different conversation and a different question. At the same time, when you see some of the companies, because part of this is like looking at our current administration, again, ruling the country as if it's a giant company, a giant corporation. You see that some of the companies associated with the Trump administration and others are still able to access cheap labor through the guest worker programs, through other programs, are actually bringing people in purposely for jobs while also saying that they're bad. That the two-facedness of that is becoming more apparent to everyday people on the ground.
I've been trying to figure out how to formulate this question, but we've been talking a lot about blue collar workers. But like one of the interesting developments in labor over the last decade is like this maybe growing class consciousness among people who you wouldn't necessarily think of traditional members of a union, grad students, computer programmers, people who recognize that they are like labor in the abstract sense, but also can unionize. So sort of looking ahead to a future where maybe things are a little bit more up in the air, or maybe the field for organizing is a little more fluid. What does, what is the messaging about who is a worker? What does that look like going forward? Like, is it still a message of you're blue collar, you wear a hard hat, or are we going to aim for maybe a broader definition of what this means, and thus like a broader sense of what a political coalition of workers looks like?
So this is a hilarious question,
Okay.
in large part because the so-called white-collar workers have, in many instances, in many sectors, have always organized. You've got doctors, you've got pilots, people in very well-to-do, what we might consider quote-unquote professional positions who are also organizing as workers. And again, like I said at the beginning, very few people are going to identify from jump as workers. They will say what they do. I'm a doctor. I'm a Presbyterian. I'm a dad. Whatever it is. And but the point is actually in the practice. And do they actually have a union or some channel through which they're able to negotiate democratically the standards of that industry or that work site or that labor market in the case of many construction workers, right? Do they have the ability to do that? And so I don't know that there needs to be a change in the definition of worker because, just to be frank, who cares? If they're doing it, if they're doing the work, I'd rather them do it than say it. I don't have any energy to invest money in a campaign that make everyone feel like they identify as a worker because they don't actually own the thing. I'm more interested in democratizing every workplace, every economic place in a way whether you're paid well or paid not so well. And part of this, just getting back to our question about democracy, and I know we've totally blown through the first 100 days. Look, it's in the past, guys. Okay. Let's leave the past in the past. We got to look forward here. But to think about that, oftentimes some of the biggest fights, the senator mentioned, like people are more worried about surveillance and what Facebook or Meta is going to do with their data and privacy. Do many of you guys remember that the West Virginia teachers in 2018? I mean, they were doing the most, right? No collective bargaining rights in that state. And yet they were negotiating. They were vying for democratic decision making. Well, everyone kept saying, what did they say on the news? They said it was a fight about, do you remember? Anyone? Healthcare, wages, right? It was true. That was a fight. But when I talked to Amy and Heather and Allison when I was in the state, I learned a couple of really important things. The first thing is that the first 3 counties in West Virginia that went out were politically the reddest counties in the state. Like deep red, right? They were the first to walk out. You assume it would be in Morganton, Charleston? No, it was the deep red counties. Secondly, the thing that they walked out over was over their data. They were being asked for their healthcare system to put their data into this app, right? And that it was too private. They were like, if he was mad, they were asking me for my underwear size. Like, I asked them, they don't need to know that. And so they walked out in a blizzard. The buses plowed, they had plows in front of the buses, taking them up to Charleston to say no to this and to actually demand a better thing. When we talk about data surveillance and what the technocrats are doing and all this kind of stuff, very rarely do people lift up the example of the West Virginia teachers in 2018. They might lift up, Silicon Valley, the ABC Union, the different groups, right? But actually, some of the most lightning flash fights for democracy, whether it's over surveillance, equality, women's rights, right, reproductive justice, are happening on the shop floor. And I just want to elevate that in this context because while so many people are trying to check out of democracy, so many workers have long been trying to check in, and it's actually on us to try to help build the framework for them to do that.
All right. We are going to take some questions from all of y'all. So I guess, is there someone with a microphone around? If not, then I would just request that you speak loudly.
You're so good. You followed the time card too.
Testing. Hi, it's Anne Marie Slaughter, the CEO of this wonderful place. Not responsible for this event, my wonderful colleagues are. I want to thank all of you, and Senator Murphy, we're grateful to you for coming back. I wonder if you would talk to us about whether you're seeing more of the kind of courage you've been displaying among your colleagues.
Well, listen, I think that there are two schools of thought right now inside the Democratic Party. There's a school of thought in which we are still living in a normal political moment, and our job is to just continue to punch relentlessly such that the president's approval ratings fall to a point where he is vulnerable in November of next year. And, frankly, what has happened over the last week has maybe accrued to the benefit of that school of thought, because his approval ratings are going down very quickly. And that doesn't just have electoral consequences next fall. When a president gets into the 30s, your enablers and your supporters and the people that you rely on for votes and coalitions, they start to get cold feet. So there's good reason for that. But then there is the other school of thought, the one that I hold, which is that we may get the president down into the low 30s, and we may still get our clocks clean next November because we don't have a free and fair election. And I don't mean that they're stuffing the ballot boxes. I just mean that the traditional mechanisms of democratic and electoral accountability are just so weak that we can't get our message out there. And oh, by the way, if they control TikTok and Twitter, and something happens as part of a deal at the algorithm shop at Meta, right, doesn't really matter what his approval ratings are. And so that would offer a sort of different prescription, which is to raise the stakes, create some emergency conditions so as to try to prompt a conversation that has urgency in the American public. Part of the reason why some of us were not as afraid of a government shutdown as other folks were. So I think we've seen some really important examples of real heroism, what Corey did and what Chris Van Hollen did. I think sort of raises the sort of level of urgency in the country. And if we get sort of more individual acts like that, then maybe we'll get the kind of mass mobilization that we will need. But it's more likely you're going to need Democratic leadership to start changing tactics, and we'll have opportunities to do that. We will have a question about the debt ceiling. We will have another conversation about whether we're going to work with the Republicans on a government funding bill in September, and those will be really important moments for us to decide whether we can just keep on punching and hoping that that has impact, or whether we have to sort of spark a more urgent national conversation around the descent of democracy. I think one of the things we have to be doing, and I think we're doing a better job of now, is inspiring the kind of collective action that is going to be necessary inside the not-for-profit community, the university community, the legal community, the media community. Perhaps what Harvard did will go down as one of the most important moments, but that only is true if we, as the opposition, help other sectors collectively organize in the way that it looks like the higher education community is collectively organizing right now.
And then the senator can take one more question and then has to go do a
we're in
very
the middle
important
of
part
votes.
of his job, which is to go vote.
We want you to vote.
So again, going to that issue of collective action, and earlier you were talking about getting out the Democratic message, which kind of implies that the Democratic Party is an organized entity. But seriously, are there discussions going on within the Democratic Party to create a collective opposition that's organized?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think we are more organized than we get credit for. I don't actually think his approval ratings go from where they were to where they are without there being some consistency of message. I think we have done a pretty decent job of explaining to the American people the stakes of the reconciliation fight. More Americans sort of know that simple story: massive cut in benefits for regular people to finance a tax cut for the very, very wealthy. That's deeply unpopular, and there's a lot more people that know about it, in part because the messaging has been consistent. I think we've done a less good job of messaging the stakes of the democratic fight, of the democracy fight. And I'll just make a pitch here. I think that's in part because people don't really see us as credible messengers when it comes to defending democracy and attacking corruption. They think that the Democratic Party has been on the current version of democracy, has been pretty supportive of the current version of democracy, which has not worked very well for workers and has worked very well for the CEO class. So I think the only way that as a party we become more effective defenders of democracy, more effective at attacking corruption, is if we get back to where we were as a party 2 decades ago, government reform as a top 3 issue for Democrats, right? And that means really big stuff, like a constitutional amendment to eradicate Citizens United and allow us to get private money and corporate money and anonymous money totally out of politics. That means the Stock Act. That means closing the revolving door. But I think ultimately Democrats are only going to be credible in saving democracy if people actually believe that if they elect us, we are going to make it a priority to unrig democracy in favor of workers, in favor of folks who don't have access to big corporate PAC accounts. I think that's absolutely essential for the survival of our party and a cohesive winning message. And I think with that, I'll leave you guys to finish up, but I got to go back and vote again. So thank you. Thanks, Jamal.
And I mean, I think we're basically wrapped up here as well. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Senator Murphy and Jamel and Smiley, for a great, excellent conversation. Smiley, you need to actually get on the ballot in North Carolina if you can hear me. So I'm Greg Jefferson. I'm with the AFL-CIO. It's my pleasure to introduce the next group of speakers. We have a fantastic group of fellow union leaders and worker advocates. So let's please welcome to the stage Eric Bunn. Is Eric here? Eric is the National Secretary-Treasurer of the American Federation of Government Employees, representing thousands of federal workers across the country. And Ann Fremer, Deputy Director of SEIU. Hey, Ann. Ooh. So Ann is the Deputy Director of the SEIU Healthcare, the healthcare division of the SEIU, and focuses on promoting and protecting the foundations of our healthcare system. Rebecca Dixon, CEO of the National Employment Law Project. Rebecca is NELP is a nonprofit which has been leading advocacy organization with the mission to build a just and inclusive economy where all workers have expansive rights and thrive in good jobs. All 3 organizations have been actively working to fight against the administration's attacks on workers and institutions. This discussion will be moderated by another longtime worker advocate, Pranita Gupta. Pranita is currently a senior fellow at Workshop and a former White House appointee on labor issues in both the Obama and Biden administrations. So with all that stated, Pranita, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. First, I want to start by thanking New America and the Good Jobs Collaborative for convening all of us for this really timely and provocative conversation. So this panel, we're going to actually really lean into the framing of this whole convening, which is that the Trump administration's actions are not working for workers. And, I think if we just step back and look at all the assaults that have happened to workers during these first 100 days, the shock and awe of the torrent of actions that this administration has put forward to dismantle the federal government. And that often overwhelms and obfuscates the impacts on workers. And just to reiterate some of the key points that Mary Alice made, that includes everything from our civil rights, including free speech, due process, to eliminating important executive orders that ensured that supported good jobs being created, or ensuring that our workforce training programs provided real opportunities for underserved communities and led to good jobs, to ensuring that workers who work on federal contracts got higher wages, to the gutting of many critical federal agencies that protect worker health and safety, and the right to organize into a union, and the ongoing attacks on immigrant communities, the revoking of DEI and anti-discrimination programs. But I think the most egregious of all the actions has been the relentless attacks on federal workers and the work of federal agencies. And that's why I think it was really heartening to hear Erica Smiley in the previous panel talk about how workers are coming together and organizing in their workplaces, because that sort of organizing that's leading to greater democracy is so critical, and why worker organizing, especially through unions, is so critical at this time. So I'm very excited to be moderating this powerhouse panel of worker advocates and worker organizers, and I'm just going to jump right in to my first question, which is, in your perspective, which of the Trump administration's actions in these first 100 days has been most harmful to workers? And how is your organization showing up at this time? And I'm going to start with Secretary Bunn.
Thank you. First, I want to say thank you for having me here to be able to speak on the issues and concerns that are affecting AFG, and as the previous panel said, democracy as it is today. There's been several. One of the major ones is the executive order that deals with the strip of over 1.5 million workers the right to have a union, collective bargaining. And within that, the National Security Act clause that impacts a lot of our agencies, to the fact that people who are healthcare workers, or who the gardener, the painter, the food service workers, are now considered national security. Really? National security about what? So it has a devastating effect on not just my union, but SEIU and other unions. But what's significant about it is that this administration came back and exempt some of these workers, the same classifications that we represent, because those unions didn't sue the administration. And it clearly made that in his EO and other statements. It's retaliation against us for standing up for our workers, standing up and taking this fight against him, because we know it's illegal acts and a lot of things he's doing. So ours is a lot of retaliation. We stood up to him in the first Trump won, or they say, oh, won, okay. And we're going to continue standing up to him and exercising our rights, making sure the message is put out there, what is actually going on, and fight for our workers, and as the previous panel speak, fight for democracy.
Thank you. Rebecca?
I would also say several things. Workers, like they said in the first panel, are the engine of democracy. They are the engine of the economy. And what we're seeing is a broad destruction of civil rights, which of course is where workers' rights are located. I think helping folks understand how fragile and how new this framework actually is. It was legal to discriminate in jobs until the 60s. There was no worker health and safety protection until the 70s. Like, all of these things are new and fragile. And so really looking at this administration, these things are still needed. They haven't been in place long enough to actually correct for the issues that we saw before. And so some of the big pieces are gutting civil rights, either through executive orders, fiat, laying off workers, even just bullying. And so gutting institutions that enforce workers' rights, such as the Merit System Protections Board and the National Labor Relations Board, where these federal workers have to go for their remedies, right? Cutting the occupational safety and health agency's ability to keep workers safe in mines, the ability to protect child labor workers, children who are being asked to work in these very dangerous environments. Cuts to those things that were already never fully staffed in the way that they should have been. Those are really, really important things for us to hold. And then there's some more ones that folks maybe don't think of, like NIOSH, which maybe the administration thinks is the same as OSHA, but isn't, and really looks at the patterns that workers are experiencing around illness or injuries and trying to figure out how we prevent that rather than just respond to it. And I think folks need to understand OSHA is all there is for worker health and safety. And we saw that in the pandemic, where workers were supposed to be, we said they were essential, but then they were treated like they were disposable. And they don't have a private right of action around health and safety in most states. And so if OSHA's not there, there's nobody there. And then the other thing I would say is taking our civil rights apparatuses and weaponizing them against us. So the destruction at EEOC of taking out the folks who are running that, the using OFCCP against equal opportunity for federal contractors. So all of these things are devastating, and they're happening right now. And so some of the ways that we're responding is joining with folks to have a place for federal workers to go for legal support. And also around unemployment insurance, making sure that federal workers, particularly in this area of the states around us, have the ability to get unemployment insurance, and that those agencies are prepared for the folks who are coming in the door. And then we are also working very hard to get NIOSH, who 90% of their staff was laid off, restored, and trying to get both sides of the aisle to pay attention to that. So those are some of the things that we're doing right now.
That's great. Anne, how about you?
So I think, like, as I thought about how to come into this room, 100 days, and it's been bad. It's been bad for working people. It's been bad for our healthcare. It's been bad for immigrants. It's been bad for our democracy. It's just bad for America these first 100 days. And our union is multi-issue, 2 million members who work in property services, who work in healthcare, who work in public sector units. And the thing is, they're getting hammered from every side, right? They sit next to you on the bus. They live in your communities, and we are struggling with the first 100 days. The thing I would say is I've also had 100 days of pride, because workers are strong. They fight the boss every day. They have to fight to be heard. You heard Erica talk about this. We have to fight to be heard in our work sites. Sometimes we're lucky enough to be able to be in a labor management partnership, and we get to give away our raises and our benefits to have a labor management partnership with our boss. That's fun. But it's partly how we have a voice, and it has set us up also partly how we do our advocacy work. And so in these 100 days, workers have stood up. I've seen federal workers stand up, but for my union, like January 8th, when it was 7 degrees in New York, 17, there were 50 workers standing outside of Mike Lawler's office saying, don't you dare cut Medicaid, because we know that Medicaid pays for the majority of home care in this country. Medicaid pays for 6 and 10 nursing home beds. Medicaid pays for 20% of our hospital admissions, and in some places a lot more. That Medicaid pays for 15 million people's health care who don't get it from their jobs because they work at McDonald's, they work at Amazon, they work at Walmart, and you're about to cut their health care to give those companies more money, right? They were standing out there. There were 50 in New York, 17. There were 100 in Orange County on the days the fires were starting to hit California. Like, workers stood up in January, and they've been standing up bigger and badder and harder every day since, and they are fighting like hell to bring down the Trump legislative agenda. And so it's been really a moment of intense remembrance of what we are as a movement, and what it means to be in solidarity with your brothers and sisters. We are fighting like hell to make sure that our collective bargaining agreements are stable and that we have plans if they're not. We are fighting like hell for our immigrant brothers and sisters. Our member, Rumeysa Ozturk, was the young woman who was picked up in Somerset, Massachusetts by a masked group who did not identify themselves as any sort of law enforcement because she wrote an op-ed. And she's in detention in Louisiana right now. And her brothers and sisters at Tufts, they've been at the court. They've been saying, bring Rumeysa home. And we're gonna continue to stand strong, but it is a rough 100 days, and it's gonna be a rough 4 years. But I think the thing that we are really focused on is many of these structures didn't particularly work well before. And so we've been trying to figure out workarounds around them. So we're not afraid. So that's what we think. Trump wants us afraid, and we're not. We're not going to be afraid. We're going to fight.
Thank you so much, Anne. I actually have a follow-up question for you and for anybody else on the panel. At this moment where we're seeing these assaults on workers and on our democracy, there's been sort of crickets from the corporate sector. And I'm curious, you mentioned labor management partnerships. How are you engaging, how are your members engaging corporate partners at this time to fight?
I will tell you, that is challenging. We have some employers who are fighting right alongside us. One of my favorite, I won't say who, we were talking to an employer, and they were talking about an employer association, let's just put it that way. And they said, well, the employer association, we were like, we got to get in, we got to protect Medicaid, this is jobs in our community, this is the work we do. And the employer is actually engaging with us, and we're having good conversations, and we're collaborating on how to fight back. Like, they have relationships that we don't on the Hill. They can get into rooms with some Republicans that we can't get into in a real way. And they said, well, the employer association has a last mile strategy. And we just thought, like, are you kidding? Workers have been standing out in the cold since January trying to save your industry, and your strategy is a last mile strategy. It's a knock, knock, wink, wink, I got money, I can give you a contribution strategy. And so it's a mixed bag, is what I would say. I would say on the immigration front, different employers have behaved differently. We are working with employers to make sure they're I-9, like that they're prepared for I-9 audits. We are working with employers to be clear on what to do if ICE walks into an emergency room. We've been working, when ICE came to the Chicago schools and the LA schools, it was workers and the administration who worked together to keep them out and keep our children safe. And our employers are more scared than their workers are, I would say, because they're afraid of being a target, but there are brave ones, and it has, where they will work, we are working hand in hand to win.
Thank you so much. My next question is just really going to be, we've been hearing a lot about how the systems don't work, right? So if we can rebuild our systems to protect workers and make sure workers have greater voice in the future, how would we rebuild? What policies or what would we need to change to build a better economy for workers? Secretary Bunn, you want to start?
Economy. Well, a lot of it was discussed in the previous panel. Okay, there's a lot we can do. It's just do we have the will and the people in place to make that change? Our rights have been attacked for years, and really, what gets down to it, let's be real. The Republicans had this agenda for years. They just found a fool to implement it. Okay, all right. He tried to do it the last administration, wasn't so successful. And this administration, they're stepping back, let him do what he wants to do, okay? But it's impacting our economy so bad. Now, what we can change, we can strengthen our laws. We can have our collective bargaining that we're supposed to. But we have to change the narrative, as you said, in the industry. And at the previous panel, workers have a right. It's not a privilege, okay? We've given up, as this young lady said, years of sacrifice to get to where we are today, and our EEOC and the workers' protections, and we got to push that thing forward, okay? On the economic side of the house, why is not there the living wage that's already nationwide at $25 an hour? Just be realistic. We can't live on the wages we have today. So Congress, I know we're a little behind the scene right now with not having control of both houses, but that's where that fight is going to take place, okay? And hopefully, 26th, we can change that, okay? And put some guardrails on this administration and start working for a better future that will protect our workers, make them a little bit more economic sense. So the things we're getting stripped away right now is ridiculous. It's going to be hard. With these tariffs, it's going to be hard for, I don't care if you well off, okay? If a car costs you $4,000 more than it cost last year, okay? It's just ridiculous. But the economic side of the house, we got a lot of work to do.
Thank you.
I think that some of what we're seeing is things being stripped away that people either took for granted or were never actually able to partake in. And we should not kid ourselves that our labor law and policy was ever completely inclusive. There are workers who are carved out completely from rights, benefits, and protections, workers who work for platform jobs or gig, workers who work for temp agencies, workers who do agricultural work, workers who do home care work, lots of workers were carved out. And they are often Black and brown workers and women. And so do we want to get real about what is equal opportunity? And if we do, then we create the systems that support that, as opposed to the systems that we've created that sort of, a lot of them based on a 1930s economy. For example, what folks depend on during a recession is unemployment insurance benefits. And the unemployment insurance system was built in the 30s, and it was built to support white, able-bodied men who were breadwinners. And our economy looks completely different now. And in most states, it hasn't been modernized. On the federal level, it hasn't been modernized. And so do we actually want to have a goal to cover everyone? Does everybody deserve a good job? And if that's how we feel, then we can make that happen. But I think so far, the proof in the pudding is that for some people, and that there are not enough good jobs to go around, and so they have to be sort of rationed out. And I think we're seeing that that is not a way to hold on to any of this stuff that we won already. So I would just say that the will has to be there, And then we know what the policy answers are. We know that we need to raise the minimum wage. We need to actually fund our enforcement agencies so they can actually enforce the law. We know that we need to do that. So those things are, the mechanisms are there. I think the will needs to be there, and there needs to be a groundswell where democracy intersects with these kinds of rights that folks depend on. And then the other thing I would say is this anti-DEI, that's anti-rights, that's anti-opportunity, and pro-exploitation. And we need to make that clear and not allow that to be used as a narrative to divide us.
That's great. Anne?
So, Rebecca, you just talked about the types of workers. What I think about is, like, in the last panel, listen, I'm not in the business of saying wipe out the NLRA, but I am in the business of saying it was built, let's be clear, it benefits employers, right? And not the right of workers to organize. It is so hard to form a union in this country. So before the election, our union, we have a convention where we set our goals every 4 years, and we said we're going to organize 1 million new workers in 10 years. And after the election, we said to ourselves, is that still our goal given the realities? And the answer was yes. And the answer was yes, because we're a union, and we're a union that was built on people who were written out. We're the janitors who worked 2 or 3 in a building at night, immigrant workers. How were they ever going to get a union? We're home care workers who work in homes with an individual. How are they ever going to get a union, right? We're gig workers. We're fast food workers. Like, people are like, oh, those fast food. It was maddening we organized fast food workers. Well, why would they need a union? Because there's no inherent value in any one job. It's about making the value in your job, right? Like, it's not that this job X is better than job Y. It's that every job should be a good job. And so, our leaders of our union have said, we're not going to be dependent on the structures that are. We're going to force new structures into being. And it is hard. I believe I fought with you in the, in an administration at, where we come in and it wasn't even a fight, but it's like, we're like putting something crazy on the table and you're like, can we have 5 minutes to react to that? Like, we're like, no, do it now. Because that's my union.
We always supported it.
But that is, I think it is, we need new structures, and I would say it's the labor structures, it's the immigration structures, it's healthcare. Like, we all know it's flawed, and we have to get out of the sort of systems we set in place 70 years ago, 100 years ago, and what you see, Rebecca, you said it, it's women of color, it's immigrants who are the ones who will stand up and challenge the structure, which is why they want to put us back in the box. And we are not willing to be put back in the box. And so it will be hard. Smiley said on the last panel, there is going to be a lot of pain. And there already is, but there's going to be a lot more pain in the next 4 years. But we also know pain is an organizing opportunity. And we're going to be talking about what is better. And we're going to continue to organize in the South. We're going to continue to organize in unusual places in the South where the labor laws haven't helped the worker in a long time. I was listening to the radio this morning, and they were talking about the Virginia Right to Work for Less law that was signed into law by a Democratic governor who encouraged the Republican legislature to pass it. Right? We've moved a long way. We have a long way to go, but progress isn't straight. Progress comes with pain, and the reason they're fighting so hard is because we are making progress, and we're going to continue to.
Absolutely. So what gives you hope during this time? I'm going to start with you, Rebecca. What gives you hope during this, what sounds and seems like a very bleak time?
I think eyes coming open and solidarity. And we are seeing solidarity. We are seeing nonprofits get together, educational institutions get together. I think people are seeing themselves in what's happening. Like, if they can do this to federal workers, can they do this to me? And I think that we can't give up. We've never given up. And I am hopeful because workers do stand up, and they stand up at great risk and say, no, this is not enough, and I won't put up with this. And so we have to get behind them. We need to figure out how we support their leadership. We saw a bunch of strikes happening last year, workers saying, no, we're not going to stand for it. And we have to figure out how we can support where the power is and push back on all of this bad stuff and not give up. And I feel hopeful in what I'm seeing of like rumblings of people coming together, of there being collective action, people coming out in the streets. And I think there's going to be more and more of that. And as the pain spreads, more and more people will see themselves in this fight.
Thank you.
I would echo what she said, and it's hope. Just since January, well, right before January this year, our organizing has jumped up so much by the pain and the fear people had with this administration. Yes, they told you we were going to do in Project 2025, okay? I don't think anybody thought it was going to be this devastating, okay? All right? Again, because there's no rules there. But the hope there that our members are out there organizing, our members are educating the community what's going on. I mean, we're looking at a possibility, not a possibility, it's supposed to happen. About 80,000 our VA employees are going to be ripped by October, September this year. The veteran community is out there, okay? And just be realistic, with the 200,000 or 1.5 million ton, 1/3 of our workforce are veterans. So it's a clear attack on veterans too, all right? But you see the protests out there. You see the people taking a stand back, okay? The AFL has been so supportive to our organization and the various labor organizations and supporting our initiatives to try to educate, to fight on the Hill about this issue here. And, you know, AFG's not going anywhere. We took a big blow, but we're going to stand up and fight like hell to make sure everybody understands what we do, what we stand for. Democracy's on the table, and we're not going there. So the hope is there. Hope would really breathe us as a person, you know, to believe in something, that is something in the future for us to gain. And I think that's really the answer.
I echo everything. I like, my hope is that, you know, unions are the multiracial democracy in our country, and that unions are holding, unions are pushing back, unions are standing up for Abrego Garcia. They're standing up for Mesa Ozturk. They're standing up for people like them. Our unions are like not cowed in this moment. And, you know, right today, LA County employees are on strike. They're on a ULP strike. You know, in Pennsylvania, we just wrapped up a strike of nurses at Geisinger. I don't know if it's a health system facility. I can't remember. I know the bad boss, Geisinger. But, you know, like, workers are still going on strike. They're still doing the work of the workplace democracy. They're not afraid to be militant. And that's the thing, is they're just getting to work to do the work that makes our country better, that makes their jobs and lives better. And so that's why I say I've had 100 days of hope, because I've seen them standing in the streets already, and not just in the streets, in the halls of Congress, like putting themselves on the line to make sure that, you know, we hold what we have and can dream of something better.
That's great. So I'm going to open up the session now to some question and answer. I'm sure many of you have good questions or thoughts you want to share.
Hey, Ted Johnson from New America. My question is about independent contractors and gig workers, and how the increase of those workers is impacting unions in the fight for labor and organizing.
That's a great question.
So we have organized them. So through a ballot initiative in Massachusetts, we have organized gig workers in Massachusetts. We were doing organizing in California. Like the industry is fighting back. It's never easy to win, right? Like the rules are stacked against workers to organize. And this is when I talk about different ways that we are looking at new structures. Part of this is we've organized through ballot measures. It's not dependent on these are not NLRB elections. And, I was on my way here today and I took a Lyft. And I did not prompt this, I swear. The Lyft driver said to me, he's like, see that guy in the scooter? He's making more money than me. And I said, well, I was like, I asked him a question. He said, no, on this ride, I'm going to make $6. He's like, him on the scooter, he gets 2 days worth of gas. Like gas is dripping out of my car every second that I'm driving. And so like they're working people just like a home care worker, like a nurse, like a auto worker. And so it's different because the structures are different for how we work, but we have to talk to them, we have to organize them, and their jobs deserve to be living wage jobs as well.
What I would say is that, say like 10 years ago when those jobs came online, there was sort of no organizing. And there was like sort of policy coming from the policy wonks instead of the people. But since the workers are actually saying what they need for those jobs to be good jobs, there's organizing going on coast to coast around this. Like in Connecticut, the drivers have introduced a bill 3 years in a row. They want minimum pay for each ride. They want, they have their demands that are shaped by them and what, so I would say in the beginning, maybe, but now there's a lot of energy. And as you said, lots of different strategies on how to help those workers come together to push for what they need.
On your point though, right, like if you think about sharecropping, right, where sharecroppers, independent contractors, they lease the land and like then the owner or whoever the owner of the land would set the terms of how much stuff could get sold. Well, now the platform is not like a land, it's an app, but it's the same business practice, right? And so there was a sharecroppers union. Why wouldn't there be a gig workers union, right? So it's the same thing. It's just how work is organized. Just to add to what. Sorry, you know what? I'm like, this is where I'm Southern. I don't see time or rules. Just kind of busted in. I apologize.
No, I like the sharecropper point because one of the points I often make about this is before the laws of the 1930s in the Great Depression, some of the first aid that went to states was for farmers and the owners. And the sharecroppers who actually did the work got nothing because they were considered independent contractors and they were not eligible to get the payments. So, we saw something similar to this during the pandemic, but then the unemployment insurance system was expanded to include those workers for the first time. So we can do better as time goes on, but yes, on the sharecropping. It's the same thing. And people say it's like, oh, platform, this is new. No, this is just exploitation in a different flavor. I mean, this has been happening in the trucking industry and in the industry with home care and all of these other industries. It's way bigger than platforms.
Other questions?
Hi, I have a question about how workers, given the rollbacks to protections for workers specifically, but generally threats to immigrants, to reproductive health that we've seen in the past 100 days, how can workers who are bargaining contracts right now or in the coming weeks, months, and years include protections for themselves that address the things that the Trump administration is attacking? So what advice do you have for workers bargaining contracts? Like what sort of protections should they be adding to them that they might not have been considering in those contracts, in the last administration?
Everyone's looking to you.
The reason I hesitate and look because the big struggle here, the Trump administration is successful and dismantling AFG. That's not going to happen. But it moves on to the private sector, okay? All right? Now, we know our point before he got in here was try to negotiate as many of our contracts we can, because realistically, I don't see any contract negotiation in the federal sector during this administration. And if there is, it's going to be drawn out so long that, it'll be another president before we get through it. But we have some great contracts out there, okay, right now. The protections need to be expanded as much as possible, okay? It varies for the different administrations. If you're SSA or if you're at VA or you're at Border Patrol, the issues that we need in those particular settings will change, okay? But we have some very good contracts. I just don't see in my industry right now, there's going to be a lot of negotiations. Now, what may be helping the private sector, because they're coming after them next. They're coming after them next. And it's all, let's be realistic. They're coming after us now, but it's really for these billionaires and people who own these companies. They don't want you to have rights. They don't want you to be negotiating. That's why it's going to be hard for NLRB to organize, okay, or to try to put a contract through. And the tactics they're going to be using to try to make sure people don't organize, okay? Delays in contract negotiations. We know what to do. We know what to ask for. Are you part of a union?
Yeah, I ask in part because New America's union, New America has a union. We've been recognized by management. I'm on the bargaining committee. I'm missing our bargaining committee meeting right now. But we're negotiating our first contract, and it's we haven't sort of done the economic part yet, but we've been drafting it, and a lot of the conversations have been around like what protections can we ask for, to protect our workers. Like, can we ask for things about like non-cooperation with ICE coming into the building, or healthcare that guarantees access to, abortions or IVF, or protections for LGBTQ parents, like all of those sorts of things that we probably wouldn't have been thinking about in the same way a year ago. So I'm curious, like, if you have advice for us, basically.
I just want to say things. All those things you say are on the table, okay? All right? At one time, we used to represent ICE, okay? And really, yeah, we did, okay? Maybe I shouldn't have said anything.
We all have one unit.
We got one of them things, okay? All right?
All workers deserve representation.
Pardon me?
All workers deserve representation.
They deserve rights to be represented too, okay? All right? And the only thing I was thinking about, I don't care what you put on the paper as far as the ICE, they're going to come in here in their damn way. You understand? I mean, you look at they're going into the churches, they're going to the schools, whatever, because they think they have that right. But all the things you talked about, you got a lot of us up here. We can give you a copy of our contracts, and you can go in and negotiate your way through this, okay?
No, I was just going to say that, in fact, there are things that you can negotiate. You can negotiate know your rights trainings. You can negotiate through your health care plan if like a law were passed to be able to get people to places where the laws are different. There's things about like making sure that like how your health care covers gender affirming care. Like all of those things are bargainable. All of those things, every collective bargaining agreement has two sides to it, right? So everybody has to agree, but it is absolutely, you can get it on the table and have a real conversation about it, and you shouldn't hesitate. And it is true. I think those things, I think the Know Your Rights trainings, you heard Tom Homan actually say that Know Your Rights trainings were irritating him, because he was blaming it on AOC, but they were happening all over the country where people who had high immigrant workforces did, their unions, their community groups, Jobs with Justice, other groups did Know Your Rights training, so people knew what to do in the moment of crisis. And that's the thing. It's getting ahead of those moments of crisis and not waiting to react to them.
And what I would say as an employer with a union that's been at NELP since 1979, and I was in the union for 5 years, so I've been on both sides of the table, is it's important to figure out what's important and what's priority and what is going to help the folks that you have right there in your employer with you. And so maybe some things look good to sort of everywhere else, but the focus really should be on those folks and what can you do to help them right now. And I would say that there are a lot of different ways to get to a solution, and really being open to what are the interests. I'm sure that that New America shares a lot of the same interests that you all have. So I think just, for us in our last round of bargaining, we did interest-based bargaining, really looking at what can we do to solve, can we figure out what we're solving for, and then can we come up with solutions together. So I would just encourage you to look into that as well, as you look forward to bargaining and getting those rights that folks deserve.
And I'll add one thing, maybe two. Okay? I like the point what she said about interest-based bargaining, but I want you to be realistic what you're walking into, okay? Most of our contracts, didn't happen on the first round. Again, find out what the main interests are of your workers that need to be addressed. It seemed like you got a very good employer, okay? As she said, I'm on both sides of the table too. But you build with your contracts once you find out what works and what doesn't work, and with your employees, because our needs change every cycle. You understand what I'm saying, okay? You get the basics, hold on those things, and see what you can expand and push them a little bit more. But it's working together because they're going to want the same thing that you want.
Well, we could continue this conversation for at least another hour, but I know we have to wrap up. I just want to thank all of you for giving us your time and sharing your wisdom, and really thank you for the incredible work you're leading in your organizations. And I'm just very privileged to be in the trenches with all of you. So thank you so much. Please give a round of applause for this amazing.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That was just a great panel. We'll give them one more round of applause. Thank you so much. I see I've gotten a little bit shorter here the second time I'm up on stage. So now I'd like to invite to the stage two other members of the Good Jobs Collaborative, Maureen Conway from the Vice President of the Economic Opportunities Program at the Aspen Institute, and Lorena Roque, the Interim Director of Worker Power and Democracy at CLASP, and I think I probably got that wrong, but I was close. Okay. At the Center for Law and Social Policy, or CLASP, if you could both please come up on stage. As I mentioned at the beginning, this question is, and it's come up so many times in this conversation, of what is it that we're building towards? What does it mean to build a good jobs economy? And we've created the tool that Lorena and Maureen are going to walk us through to find that. And do we want to get these? Yeah, okay. And if you want to move the chairs. Okay.
The slides.
Great. All right.
So I'm going to move. Why don't you just have a seat and then we'll switch. And I'm getting the little step stool back here because I was admiring that. I need one when I need to travel with one or something. Anyway, good afternoon. Great to see everyone. And do I just do this?
Yeah, it's the green button of the way. There you go.
There we go. So great, and I'm so excited to get to close out with this introduction of our Good Jobs Compass. So this is a product of the Good Jobs Collaborative. We have been working on various things for a while on different issues for how to promote a good jobs economy. And basically, this what we came to is, well, we really need a kind of a simple tool to answer a simple but important and too frequently inasked question. Does this policy promote good jobs, right? Too often in our economic policies does it promote job growth? Does it promote economic growth? Does it lower unemployment? Like all other kinds of things, what's it gonna do to the market? But it doesn't actually talk to, are the jobs good jobs, right? So that's what we were after on this. I also want to recognize that, certainly public policy is not the only lever for promoting good jobs. Obviously, we've been hearing a lot about workers and worker organizing and the important work that they do in promoting good jobs. There are businesses that think about different business models that can promote good jobs. There's lots of other civil society actors that promote good jobs. lots of different strategies. I say all that because I'm going to plug a little paper I have out there that is about how we think about building a good job practice into a variety of different kinds of work. So I have a little paper out there about that. And also, we are now recruiting our next round of job quality fellows across a variety of different practices. We're focused on working in the South. So if you're interested in the Job Quality Fellowship at the Aspen Institute, I encourage you to take a look at that and think about that. Okay, end of PSA. So let me, this way. So the Good Jobs Collaborative, I said a little bit about this. We have some lovely language here, and I'm going to emphasize 2 points. One is just that all jobs should be good jobs, and I think I want to even strengthen it to say all jobs can be good jobs, right? I think we really need to have that North Star of all jobs can be good jobs. I also want to emphasize the bottom point of, because when we measure what matters, we build the economy working people and all of us deserve. And I think it's really important in this measure that we are looking at the jobs. Often, I've done a lot of work over my career in anti-poverty and other kinds of things, and we're often looking at the people. Looking at the people is important. But what happens is we keep saying, how do we help these people? And maybe we can move them out of these jobs that are no good, and we can move them into these other jobs that may be better, right? But the jobs still sit there being crappy. And other people who we're not looking at just move into those crappy jobs, and we're not moving the system forward. We're not making it so that all jobs are good jobs. And we're not going to get to a place where all people have a good job unless all jobs are good jobs. So there we are. So we hastily built this Good Jobs Compass, and it has 4 dimensions. So I'm going to sort of kind of walk through the 4 dimensions of the Good Jobs Compass, and I'm going to turn it over to Lorena to walk through some different examples. I might use a little example as I move along. But the first dimension. So the first dimension, economic security. So looking for my notes here. So in this one, we want to think about that, like economic security obviously is an important component of a good job. And so we want to think about things like, does the policy improve earnings for workers, right? Does it give them more money, right? Does it improve benefits, health care, paid leave, all the stabilizers in our lives that provide economic security? Does it strengthen protections for, fair and reliable schedules? So not only does it give you a decent income today, but can you predict what it'll be tomorrow? So these things are sort of the basics of economic security. And I'm going to use just one policy as a little example as I go through. So because I've been thinking a lot about the earned income tax credit, right? And I think the earned income tax credit actually is helpful in economic security, right? It helps people who have low incomes get more money. So I think I would give it sort of a positive on the economic security dimension. When we go to economic mobility, then we're asking sort of a different set of questions. Does the policy or action ensure clear and fair hiring and promotion practices? Is there pay equity across race and gender? Does it help you sort of build skills that are going to help you move ahead and grow? Does it give you opportunities to build wealth? Maybe are there things that help you own a stake of the company, like in ESOPs or other kinds of employee-owned structures, right? So what are the retirement benefits look like, right? So these are the things that by helping you build wealth and helping you advance in a career, you can pursue economic mobility as you choose. I would say the earned income tax credit, sort of has this idea that if you attach people to the labor market, I think you hear this sometimes with all kinds of like work work attachment policies. Like if you just get in, then you'll be able to move ahead. But I think the reality belies that idea, right? Like we're seeing lots of people get in and not get anywhere, right? So I don't think you can, that the earned income tax credit really does much on this. So I'm going to say yellow on this one, and this will make sense in a minute. So the first one was green, and the second one was yellow in terms of economic mobility, because it speaks to economic mobility in some sense, but it's not really putting any structures in place to make that happen. So the third one is respect, safety, and dignity for all. And this one is, sort of about healthy, safe working conditions, strengthen protections from harassment, discrimination. Does it help create a more inclusive workplace? And I would just say the earned income tax credit does not speak to this. It just doesn't speak to this. I should also have made the disclaimer, this is just me. Like, I'm not in my example, I didn't vet this with the whole Good Jobs Collaborative. So, so I see some other members out there. If you want to speak to me later, fine. But I would say so I'm going to give this one a gray. I just don't think it has much to say. And, not all policies speak to all dimensions of what's a good job, and that's okay. And then the last point I wanted to speak to is worker voice and agency. So whether a policy strengthens working people's ability to speak up, to organize. And on this one, I would say it kind of goes in the wrong direction, right? Because it's basically sort of making people's ability to earn a decent living, contingent on holding on to that job, even though this is basically my argument against all kinds of work requirements. But it basically says, hold on to a job for this private company, and then the public sector will pay you. What's up with that? But I feel like it in the employer-employee dynamic, it puts more power in the employer's hands, right? The employer has more power over your livelihood than they should, right? They have power over pay that goes beyond what they're giving you. And so I think that this actually works against worker voice and agency. So I would give it a red on this one. Oops, I went. So there's my colors. So the first part was green. Then we had something off course. Then we said doesn't apply. And then we said, kind of bad, actually. It's really not helping workers have more power in the workplace. The other thing I want to say about the earned income tax credit is many people like it. They think it helps people, and it does give low-income people more money, right? But as I said at the start, this is about evaluating what it does to jobs, right? And when we think about less about what is it doing to a specific group of people and more about what is it doing to the quality of jobs in our economy, that's what I'm looking at here, and that's where I think that I would say the earned income tax credit is just off course, and would be like that. And now I'm going to hand it over to Lorena to go through some other ones.
Wow, I'm really short. Thank you all for being here today. And thanks, Maureen, for walking us through everything. So we're going to do about 3 examples of different policies using the Good Jobs Compass. And this is really meant a tool for policymakers, for advocates on how to really center workers when examining any policy. And is it good for workers? Is it not? And how we can make them better. And it's also meant to analyze any policy at any level of jurisdiction, so local, state, or national. I might not be able. Oh. Okay, so first, this bill is really exciting. This is the Fostering Artificial Intelligence Responsibility Act, or the FAIR Act. This bill comes out of Massachusetts, so we wanted to include a state example. So on economic security, I should also say, this bill does a lot of things, so this is a great example to walk through all the different promotion it does for having a good job. So under economic security, it restricts the collection and use of employee data with only the necessary data being included. So this really promotes fair and reliable scheduling. As artificial intelligence becomes the norm at jobs, workers have seen being squeezed in terms of being a means of production. And so this really helps promote scheduling. Next, on economic mobility, this bill restricts employers from relying solely on automated decision-making data for promotions and for hirings. A lot of the times in practical use, some companies will look at resumes through automated decision-making data and not actually look at resumes at all or have like a holistic hiring process. And so this does away with that. Under respect, safety, and dignity for all, it strengthens protections from arbitrary worker power. So really using any disciplinary or retaliation from workers failing to follow the output of an automated system, right? So if a system tells you to do something, but you think it's wrong and you use your better judgment as an employee, you cannot be retaliated or reprimanded for that. And finally, on worker voice and agency, this really centers engaging workers in implementation of new technologies at the workplace. And I should also mention that this bill is one of the first bills that addresses AI, and that's actually going to the House floor in Massachusetts. So we hope to see more bills like this that promote equity when using artificial intelligence in the workplace. Now, on the complete opposite side of good, also, as you guys can see, it's all green because we love that. On the bad, so this is something we don't like. The Good Jobs Collaborative does not like. It's very bad. And so it is the executive order for the exclusions from federal labor management relations programs. This was the executive order that the Trump administration came out with under the guise of national security, but really retaliation for unions like AFL, SEIU, and AFG speaking out against the administration. So even though we could just go across the board, it does actually help to go through them individually. So for economic security, it weakens worker protections and their rights to critical benefits. So right, without the strip, so this EO, I should mention, stripped government workers for collective bargaining rights. And so really they can't bargain over their benefits or their pay. And then on economic mobility, it promotes unfair hiring and promotion practices and creates economic anxiety in terms of their job security. Really without federal unions, they are open to more vulnerabilities as workers. And then under respect, safety, and dignity for all, it weakens the ability to ensure safe and healthy workplaces. So as Rebecca was saying, the last panel on OSHA, now unions can't really take their claims workers can't take their claims without the ability to organize. And then finally, on the last one, worker voice and agency, is really the overarching one on this one, right? It's trying to strip workers. This is the goal of the Trump administration via this executive order. And then lastly, this was the collaborative was inspired by having Chris Murphy speak, which he is a lead author of the American Family Act. It was introduced a few weeks ago on the U.S. Senate floor. And this one, similar to Maureen's example, it doesn't have to be just a worker power bill. It could be any progressive policy that we support for the most part. So on economic security, very exciting, increases the amount of money that a household gets for children 0 to 3, newborns $6,400, 1 to 6 $4,300, 3,600 6 to 17 of child of those ages. And most importantly, it makes it fully refundable, which means that those who make the lowest amount of income can take full advantage of the credit. Next, on economic mobility, this really increases wealth building opportunities so that workers can afford childcare. And I think this is also at the crux of the collaborative is that all these issues are worker issues. Childcare isn't just a parent issue. Paid leave isn't just a women's issue, it's a worker issue. And then on respect and dignity and safety for all, helps workers manage their childcare instead of attaching work requirements to childcare support payments, and so which gives employers more power in the employment relationship. So that's also important. And then lastly, on worker voice and agency, it doesn't really talk about that. It's more of like on economic security, so it doesn't really address worker voice or agency in that way. But as I was really inspired by the last panel on different policies, right? You could even put the Fair Labor Standards Act as something that was written a long time ago, but it might not support worker voice for all. Farm workers are excluded out of that bill. On the Family Act for paid leave, which gives everyone paid leave, the economic security aspect would be like incurs the millions of dollars that women, primarily women of color, lose by not having access to paid leave. And lastly, Maureen and I have plugs on additional resources. So at class today, we launched tracking the harm of Doge cuts. This was very much inspired by our work with the Good Jobs Collaborative. It tracks the amount of layoffs from government agencies, divisions, and departments. But most importantly, it highlights the programs impacted, as well as the number of households and people at risk for every single one. So we will be updating weekly, and so there will be new ones, in a perfect world, there wouldn't be, but we are committed to making this up to date. And Maureen, I don't know if you wanted to talk.
I think it's self-explanatory.
Okay, great.
Definitely don't need this. All right. Good afternoon. I'm standing between you all and lunch, so I will be quick for sure. I'm Dr. Kayla Elliott. I am the Director of Workforce Policy at the Joint Center, which is America's Black think tank. And so much of what was shared today really resonates with my work, but also with so much of what we do at the Good Jobs Collaborative. I was really struck by, and if I could get my tablet to cooperate, there we go. Maybe not. Really struck by the comments. There we go. I was really struck by Rebecca's comment on we shouldn't be kidding ourselves that our labor protections were ever inclusive. So many were built almost 100 years ago to support white able-bodied men. And if we believe everyone deserves a good job, we have to make that happen. And I love how much that really echoed Smiley's point from the earlier panel that losing systems that are oppressive or minimal or the bare minimum are or that protect the status quo. In that loss, there's an opportunity for progress and reimagining more. And I was on my way out this morning, getting dressed, threw on my little Afrofuturism pin just because it matched, but grabbed the book on my way out the door. And really, so much of what you all have said has really resonated with the concept of Afrofuturism. And those who weren't able to visit the exhibit that was at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, this has really been on my mind because of what we've seen happening at the museums, right? And what we understand will be true for the Smithsonian's as yet another place of attack. Afrofuturism is a way to theorize an authentic, hopeful, and culturally expansive Black experience, which became a way for artists to explore how tech and fantasy and ideas about the future could advance Black life. And so I go to this exhibit, and I'm a nerd, right? I'm a huge sci-fi nerd. I'm expecting to see Octavia Butler and all the cool, like, tech advancement things. Who I didn't expect to see was Martin Luther King, who I didn't expect to see were so many activists, right? And it dawned on me, like, futuring is not just the cool movies and the great books and the theories about what will happen. Futuring is the thing that we're doing here now and imagining what should be possible and working towards what should be possible. And I want to push us all to really embrace that in what we do. I think Senator Murphy's comments around the U.S. having a spiritual crisis also really resonated with a lot of Dr. King's teachings for me. And in a time when we are feeling a lot like a dystopian movie these days, we do have very clear examples of what to do and how to organize ourselves, many of which were shared with us on this panel, on both of these panels today. And so I would encourage us to, one, continue to connect, continue to organize, continue to listen to one another and listen to workers. But if this is textbook fascism and this is textbook authoritarianism, we have the textbooks on resistance as well. We have stories of resistance as well, and we need to look to those people, those ancestors, those stories, those histories, those examples that we achieved in the past to keep us going. And I will leave you not with my own words, but with those of Anne Fremmer, who said, "Workers stood up in January, and they have stood up every day bigger and badder and harder every day since." And I encourage us all to do the same. Thank y'all for being here. Very quick thank yous. Thank you to all of the panelists, Senator Murphy, Jamel Bowie, Erica Smiley, Greg Jefferson, Mary Alice McCarthy, Pranita Gupta, Ann Fremmer, Rebecca Dixon, Eric Bunn, and Lorena Roque. There are sandwiches out for everyone. Please stay for the next event at 2 o'clock, put on by the New America's Democracy team. And thank you to everybody for attending and those of you online as well.